We are here at the Scale Up Summit by Fortune Magazine, and I'm with Jim Whitehurst, who just came off the stage, President and Chief Executive Officer of Red Hat, the world's leading provider of open source enterprise IT products and services. And he's also the author of The Open Organization, Igniting Passion and Performance, which was published by the Harvard Business Review Press. And in fact, in my venture column, I suggest it was one of the top 2 business biographies in 2015. I want to jump right on in, Jim. You know, there's all this talk about the slowdown in productivity. So you had an interesting take on that on the stage.
Yeah, well, I think that so much of what drove productivity for a long time was optimizing mass manufacturing, and we saw a doubling in GDP per capita in the industrialized world every 30 years starting in 1870. That started to slow down as we've reached the limits, the incremental 1% in productivity is getting harder and harder and something we've optimized. We've also had this explosion of information technology, and you say, well, why hasn't that improved productivity? And I would say simply, information technology is a little bit, as Steve Jobs would say, a bicycle for the mind. It allows the mind to do more things. But unless we build the capability to get innovation out of our organizations, then we're not going to see growth. And I would argue the biggest challenge that we face as leaders today is how do we build organizational structures that are capable of getting the best out of their people and allowing innovation to happen, and then we should still be on a path to double productivity or output per capita every 30 years.
So it's really management's in the way.
Management's in the way. Management's part of the problem. I often think of myself as the frog that was thrown into boiling water, right? I was a traditional leader at a traditional company, and I didn't realize the change was happening until I came to a radically different company. And so I was thrown in the hot water, and I realized there was something different, and I've tried to write a little bit about that.
And tell us how it was different. So you come out of Delta Airlines, you're involved in its turnaround, coming out of its bankruptcy, very traditional top-down, and you walk in and you tell the story about like your first encounter with the organization.
Well, it seemed completely chaotic to me at the time. So Delta, which as most traditional companies are, was very, very focused on driving efficiencies. And what you find when you're trying to drive creativity is that doesn't really work because you can't pre-program out creativity. And so you need a different structure to do it. And to get the best out of people, you have to create a context where people feel comfortable in innovating. And for traditional leaders, that feels like chaos. So when I first got to Red Hat, I would say, I think we should do this. And people would say, yeah, that's a bad idea. We're not going to do it. And I would say, well, but I'm the CEO. Don't you have to? And I guess to some extent I can formally order someone, but that's trampling on the very culture that allows for innovation. And so I've learned over time there's a different structure where you get people to do things because they want to and they're passionate about it, and you create space for people to try things. And mistakes are good things, not bad things, because that allows you to try things and be more creative. If you want to sum it up, I guess, a little bit in engineering terms, our last generation was about taking variance out of process. This next generation around innovation needs to be adding variance back to process, and so it's a whole different process and systems required in management thinking and leadership style to do that.
And I loved it when you shared from the stage this very simple indicator. And it was about the water cooler in the boardroom. Share that. Yeah,
this was actually something I will say that I took from Ed Catmull from Pixar, where he said if there is more honesty at the water cooler than there is in your boardroom, then you have a problem. I think everybody ought to really, really think about that. Are people having the frank, open dialogue in meetings where decisions are made, or are they waiting till afterwards to snipe about it in small groups where they feel more safe? You have to make sure that people feel safe to have those discussions. And the reason I particularly like it is Ed Catmull, right? It's not somebody who's talking about how do I run something more efficiently.
And who is he again? He's the one.
Ed Catmull's the CEO or founder of Pixar, right? So this is about making animated movies. It's about creativity. And he would argue you can't be creative if you can't have constructive dialogue and conflict, right? And I would argue that's true in any organization. When I was at Delta, we went through a bankruptcy restructuring, which was very, very difficult. And we had advisors who do that for a living. They do restructuring. And they have this term called terminally nice. And that refers to companies that are so nice when they have their dialogues that they ultimately fail and die because they are too nice to never have the hard conversations they need to have to identify the right issues and work their way through them.
But you couldn't just tomorrow throw people into that kind of situation. You guys really focus on training people on how to do that. And you mentioned the kind of training that you guys recommend and you do.
We do a lot of training around this because once you get it up and going, it's like a flywheel. Once it's going, people get used to it. But Couple things. First off, we do run our organization through training. We're big fans of Crucial Conversations. It's been really, really good for our organization to take it out of the technology context and talk about it in the context of a traditional management kind of structure. And then we reinforce that with our management team and actually try to go out of our way to thank people for raising difficult issues.
Now, it's been quite controversial, Uber. And you brought them up on stage and you gave us a little bit different perspective about why and how Uber works so well. Share a little bit of that.
So, well, Uber's talked a lot about disrupting the transportation system, and people use the word Uberized to talk about, don't want to be Uberized, and that's great and it's interesting, and there's a lot of interesting dynamics there. I think the thing that's not talked about is Uber as an organization. So if you think about Uber, it has hundreds of thousands of people working for it.
Like you did at Delta.
Exactly. But in this case, they're individual actors. They don't actually work for the company. And what I was saying, at Delta Airlines, even with 1,000 planes and 80,000 employees, we had massive optimizations that we had to do to try to get planes and people and all to the right place at right time. I can't even imagine if you tried to proscribe the optimization system for hundreds of thousands of Uber drivers and their vehicles and maintenance schedules, et cetera, et cetera. It would be massively expensive and frankly inefficient. Uber solved it a different way. They're not employees, they're individual actors. So rather than saying, I'm going to proscribe people doing X, what they're basically saying is bring your own car and you're responsible for that car and you're responsible for your own schedule and when you work. So optimize for yourself. And in the end, those hundreds of thousands of micro optimizations, I guarantee you, are more optimal than if all of those people were employees and you were trying to do a top-down optimization. And that's really one of the powers and innovations of Uber that's never talked about, but I find fascinating.
And that's Red Hat. You've gotten to $2.5 billion in revenue. You've got 9,000 employees, but you have all these other contributors that have added to the product.
Absolutely. 80% of our supply chain is other people working on our products. And and it's not just that you get the crowdsourcing aspect, it's also that we get big IT users. So people like Google and Facebook and Twitter are contributing code to the projects that we ultimately turn into products.
Jim Whitehurst, CEO of Red Hat, author of The Open Organization. Thank you so much for being here.
Great to be here. Thanks so much.
You bet.